She got on the plane in, silenced another face in the crowd. Nobody knew her name, and nobody even thought to ask. But when disaster hit during flight, the woman they didn't notice did the impossible. This isn't a tale about a plane ride that went wrong, it's about power, prejudice, and quiet strength in the air. You won't believe how one forgotten woman turned it all around. Press play to continue. She got on the plane quietly, just a passenger in a black commercial jacket, no wings across her chest, no bars on her shoulders. Most of them didn't even see her. Some confused her with a flight attendant. Others looked at her and then looked away. But what nobody realized, not the passengers, not the crew, not even the pilot himself, was that this black woman, sitting quietly toward the front of the plane, would eventually have every one of the lives on board in her hands. And they nearly didn't let her. Ava Coleman was more than a passenger. She was a commercial pilot certified best in her class. Thousands of flight hours logged, schooled in emergencies that other crews only heard about. But it was not turbulence or lost engines that challenged her most. It was being noticed. Not because that was one of her the moment she stepped into the terminal, but respected not. The captain, a grizzled white man by the name of Reeves, had issued her that look, the one with which she was all too familiar, the one who muttered, "You don't belong in my cockpit." She went to him, tastefully, professionally, to lend a hand after spotting the co-pilot visibly ill. He closed the door on her. "We've got this," he said to her. What he was saying was, "We don't need you." But 20 minutes after takeoff, the illusion of control shattered. The plane jolted, masks dropped, people screamed, and over the intercom came a broken, desperate voice. "We're experiencing a medical emergency." The co-pilot had collapsed mid-flight. Captain Reeves was alone, overwhelmed, and spiraling into panic, and the only person on that plane who had the training to step in was the very woman he had turned away. Ava didn't hesitate. She pushed past the fear, past the noise, past the disbelief of a flight attendant who tried to hold her back. She shouted what no one had listened to the first time. "I'm a pilot." This time, the cockpit door opened. This time, she was needed. With steady hands, she took the co-pilot's seat. With a calm voice, she contacted air traffic control. With beautiful proficiency, she diverted the plane, stabilized the descent, and coordinated an emergency landing. Passengers had no clue who was at the controls, but they could sense the change. The panic subsided to silent hope. The nosedive leveled off. Ava Coleman, overseen, dismissed, underestimated, was now their lifeline. When the wheels landed, the landing was flawless. A smooth glide that felt like salvation, and as rescue teams rushed the runway, Captain Reeves emerged first white-faced, stunned, a man who knew he'd been rescued by the same person he'd declined to trust. But it was Ava's exit from the cockpit that brought time to a standstill. She emerged, cool, poised, head held high. Silence hung over the cabin until a small girl breathed, "Mom, that pilot resembles me." That murmur rang out louder than any cheers. Then the cheering began, quiet at first, then thundering, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Nava's story was international by the next morning. Her composure in the face of crisis made headlines. Black female pilot saves 181 lives during in-flight crisis. In interviews, however, Ava boasted not at all. She never mentioned heroism. She merely stated every pilot prepares for a moment like this. The difference, I had to battle harder just to get into the room. That reality hit with greater impact than any touchdown. Even Captain Reeves apologized publicly, owning up to his unconscious prejudice that almost resulted in loss of lives. The airline rewarded her. The world cheered her. But Ava did not ask for any of these. All she wanted to do was get out and do what she had spent her entire life learning to do, fly. This is not the tale of a flight crisis. This is the tale of a woman who wouldn't let the world's expectations define her. A woman who remained prepared, remained composed, and proved to everyone that greatness doesn't have to yell. It just requires a second. Ava Coleman didn't merely pilot a plane. She piloted a message that the individuals we overlook, the voices we silence, the ability we ignore, could quite possibly be the exact ones who rescue us when we need them most. The cabin creaked violently. Overhead compartments clattered. Passengers gripped armrests as the plane shook like a toy tossed in a whirlwind. But Ava Coleman did not blink, because what she experienced wasn't terror of the flight, it was the burn of humiliation. "Ma'am," the pilot said curtly, standing over the narrow door to the cockpit, "this is the flight deck. You must vacate immediately." His tone was clipped, dismissive. The door closed with click behind him. Ava stood, frozen, her breath halfway between shock and rage. Not again. Not today, not like this. She stared down at her uniform, a simple, neat, professional one, but no wings, no captain's bars, just a commercial crew jacket, one which in the pilot's opinion didn't entitle her to be anywhere near the controls. They viewed her as crew associated at best. A support person, perhaps a flight attendant, perhaps a junior trainee. Definitely not a pilot. What they didn't see, what they refused to see, was Ava Coleman was one of the most experienced pilots on the flight, period. She'd had more than 3,000 flight hours logged. She'd flown single-engine and twin-world, was certified in emergency tactics, advanced avionics, and crisis cockpit procedures. And unlike most of her contemporaries, she'd achieved it all without a family name, a background in the military, or legacy status in the flying community. No, Ava did it through sheer will. Midnights, double runs, airport studying during layovers. She had worked for each and every one of those credentials, each flight hour, each cockpit seat. But no matter how far up she rose, someone was always poised to slam the door in her face, as Captain Reeves had just done today. She hadn't even meant to get noticed. She got on the plane quietly, sat near the front, and attempted to remain invisible. She went near the cockpit only because she saw the co-pilot stagger when boarding, obviously dizzy, possibly ill. She had seen it happen before: dehydration, low oxygen, exhaustion. Any of them could be hazardous at 35,000 feet. Ava simply wanted to assist, that was all. But the captain's eyes barely shifted beyond her skin, beyond her gender, beyond her reserved nature. She had knocked softly, identified herself firmly. "Captain, I'm Ava Coleman, certified commercial pilot. You saw your co-pilot didn't look well. If you need to have me take over, I'm happy to help." He hardly allowed her to continue. "No offense, ma'am, but we're fully trained and crewed. We'll do it from here," and then the door closed. Nava sat back down, jaw tight. The turbulence outside now became more like the turbulence within. She breathed and looked out at the window. The clouds were heavy, dark, and roiling. There was a storm cell close by. She could sense it in the way the plane shook, but her mind was not with the weather. It was with her mother. Only 2 days prior, Ava received the call. Her mother had passed away peacefully, but unexpectedly. A low-key warrior, the woman who had single-handedly raised her, holding down 2 jobs, never asking for assistance. She was the one who instructed Ava, "They'll call you everything you're not, but never forget who you are." Thus Ava never did. She learned to fly when everybody doubted that she could. Passed tests most couldn't, was hired at an airline that did not often hire women of color to fly the plane. She smiled through the freezing glares, laughed away the patronizing, and continued to fly. And now, on her way to say goodbye, she was shut down again. Not due to a lack of training, not due to a lack of ability, but because she didn't appear to be a pilot. She closed her eyes, attempting to swallow the bitter load in her chest. Then the plane shook again, harder this time. Gasps spread throughout the cabin. A drink cart leaned drunkenly. Ava's eyes opened. She knew that shake wasn't normal. Something was wrong. She unbuckled in a rush and looked toward the cockpit. The co-pilot's voice did not sound over the intercom. The captain's voice did not sound either. Silence, and suddenly, the terror on passengers' faces grew. Ava stood up again, this time with intent. The second they had doubted her for was here, in the woman they had attempted to. Silence was going to shock the world. Ignored, dismissed, underestimated. That's always how it had begun, not with big words or open taunts, but with the kind of silence that cut sharper than anything uttered. Ava Coleman recognized the look. She'd seen it her entire career. The silent head-to-toe scan, the almost stifled smirk, the swift dismissal in the eyes. On board, she had also caught Captain Reeves looking at her, not with respect or recognition, but judgmentally. That slight squint of his eyes told her everything. "You don't belong here." She dismissed it, reminded herself it didn't count. She was here as a passenger, not a pilot, just a grieving daughter trying to make it to Atlanta in time for her mother's funeral. And yet, even when she tried to shrink into invisibility, the storm found her. Moments after takeoff was delayed, a calm but unsettling announcement echoed through the cabin. "We apologize for the delay. One of our crew members is experiencing a health issue. We'll update shortly." Passengers murmured and shifted, annoyance already simmering. Ava frowned. She'd seen something small but clear. The co-pilot, when boarding, had stumbled a little, resting against the cockpit wall as if attempting to catch himself. His gait was uneven. He was perspiring before they'd even departed the gate. Ava had flown long enough to recognize when something was not quite right, yet she remained silent. It wasn't her job, or so she'd been led to believe. Moments crept by, 30, then 40. The engines soon roared to life, and the plane started to taxi. But Ava's worry only intensified. From her window seat back, just a few rows from the cockpit, she caught sight of him again through the open gap of the cockpit door. The co-pilot was deathly white, his head swaying slightly. One hand white, knuckled around the console as if it were the only thing holding him in place. Her heart pounded. This was not exhaustion, this was risk. With professional calm, she unbuckled and proceeded to the front, nodding deferentially to a flight attendant before tapping gently on the cockpit door. A moment later, the door creaked open a few inches, and there stood Captain Reeves. She presented a respectful but firm voice. Sir, person can bill it isn't feeling well. I'm Ava Coleman, certified commercial pilot, multi-engine rated. If you need help, but she didn't even get to finish, his face contorted in that all too familiar mask of superiority, that smirk. That little eye roll, that disdain, his words short and icy hit her like bricks. Appreciate the concern, but we're professionals, we've got this. And then, click, the door slammed in her face again. The message couldn't be plainer. You're not one of us. Nava stood still for a moment, not out of fear, but out of seething disbelief. Even now, when she extended her assistance, her training, her presence, everything she had labored for her entire life, she was rejected. Not because she wasn't qualified, not because they weren't in need of assistance, but because of what they perceived when they looked at her. A black woman, not a pilot, not equal, just a disruption. She sat back down in silence, her mind a tempest more deafening than the planes roaring outside. How many times had she been instructed to wait her turn, to keep to her place, to be thankful simply for being in the room? And yet, when lives were at stake, they still wouldn't hear her. Her heart thudded. The plane was moving now, taking off incrementally. Drunk passengers sipped their cocktails oblivious. But Ava continued to watch, to wait, because in her heart she knew this wasn't over, not yet. 20 minutes into the flight, all changed, and not at all as anyone on board might have anticipated. The airplane shook out of the blue, lurching sharply to one side as overhead bins burst open and cups flew across tray tables. People screamed, passengers grasped each other, confusion instantly dissolving into horror. And then, with a hiss and a pop, oxygen masks descended like vines from the ceiling. The sound of rushing air filled the cabin, and people scrambled to secure their masks. But amid the chaos, Ava Coleman was already on her feet. Something wasn't just wrong, it was critical. Then came the voice, cracked, struggling, nearly unintelligible, over the intercom. This is your captain. We're experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit. The words were slurred, the message incomplete, but it was enough. Ava's heart dropped. She knew. The co-pilot had collapsed. She didn't wait for confirmation. Her instincts, honed from thousands of hours in the air, kicked in. She bolted toward the cockpit. A flight attendant, pale and panicked, tried to stop her, arms outstretched, voice high with fear. But Ava brushed past her with a force that silenced everything. I said, I'm a pilot, she shouted over the roar. The passengers turned, eyes wide, some too frightened to talk, others too stunned to respond. The plane jerked downward once more, this time tilting alarmingly to one side. The horizon outside the windows was off kilter. They were plummeting down quickly, and the plane had no specific direction. Ava didn't wait. She made it to the cockpit door and pounded once, twice, and before she could scream again, it swung open. Captain Rivas alone stood, dripping with sweat down his temple, both hands shaking with fear as he held the yoke and attempted to balance between flight control and the coming deluge of radio talk from air traffic control. The co-pilot, hunched forward in his seat, was out cold. His face was a pallid gray, shallow his breathing. Get in here, Reeves snapped, voice breaking with tension. Ava slid into the co-pilot's seat without another word. The moment her hands touched the controls, her body calmed. This was her world, not the waiting area, not the aisle seat. Here, she grabbed the headset, adjusted it with precision, and in a clear, commanding voice announced, "This is Ava Coleman, commercial pilot ID 2947. I'm assuming co-pilot duties. Urgency landing procedure requested right away." Static echoed for a few seconds, then Roger. That of a Coleman, diverting to nearest runway, stay with us. Captain Reeves stared at her, amazed, as though beholding her for the first time, but nothing came back at her. She was intent, each movement smooth, each shout clear. She went through the emergency protocols in her mind like a workout. Watched instruments, leveled pitch and altitude, entered new flight trajectories. She was the calm voice in a panic-filled cockpit. Grounds below were clearing airspace. Fire and medical services were moving in the cabin. Passengers had fallen, silent except for the occasional cry or whispered prayer. But what none of them recognized yet was that the same woman they hardly even saw getting on, whom some probably assumed was merely a flight attendant or perhaps an assistant, was now the reason they had a possibility of survival. Descending, Ave worked with Reeves, his hands still quivering, but responding to her instruction. She took final approach, landing gear down. Flaps fully extended, the runway burst out of the clouds. A tiny strip of safety in a mad sky. And as the wheels hit the ground, light and even, a stunned hush filled the plane, followed by deafening applause. It wasn't relief, it was a fake it. Cabin attendant sub. Passengers sub. On the ground, rescue workers rushed to it, but in the cockpit, Ava simply sat quietly for an instant, thudding heart but unblinking eyes. She had just done what they had told her she couldn't. Not because she wanted to show them wrong, but because other people's lives depended on it. She took off the headset and gazed at Captain Reeves. He opened his mouth to say something, but words escaped him. He simply gazed at her, no longer doubting, but with something much more intense: respect. Nodded once, stood up from the seat, and walked into the aisle. The passengers turned as she exited the cockpit, and in that moment, every head turned, because the woman they had disrespected had just rescued them all. As she grasped the yoke, everything Ava Coleman had prepared for, every flight hour, every test, every moment of fear that she had overcome, clicked into place like the mechanism of a finely lubricated machine. Her hands moved with precision, not desperation. As Captain Reeves sat next to her, stunned and bulging-eyed, attempting to register the moment Ava's presence brought into the cockpit something it had lacked: certainty. Reeves was shocked, breath short, words fragmented, and hands shaking while attempting to keep pace with messages. Nava leaned forward softly, voice even, bordering on kind in spite of chaos. "You all right to handle comms?" she asked, without censure, without venom. He nodded gradually, as if emerging from a mist, and handed her the frequency log. She redirected the plane to the closest emergency landing field, revised altitude procedures, and notified the tower of the co-pilot's illness. Outside, clouds massed darkly against the windows. Inside, terror hung suspended like smoke. Passengers had no idea who was piloting the aircraft now. They knew only that they were alive, descending, and still flying, but they didn't know it was her, the black woman they had walked by without hesitation during boarding, the one whose assistance offer had been immediately disregarded. Ava wasn't concerned about the applause and praise. She was concerned about bringing the plane down. Every moment counted. She read the instruments like poetry, tuned out Reeves' ragged breathing, and stabilized the plane like she'd done 100 times in simulations, except this was no simulation. This was actual. Lives were riding on her, and she was ready. The next 45 minutes, the world outside faded away, and all that remained was the cockpit, the sky, and the mission. As the airport runway came into sight at last, Ava started the landing procedure with calm, perfect execution, deploying flaps, adjusting speed, pitch, correcting. The wheels touched down on the tarmac, and the cabin was filled with the gentle shriek of rubber on blacktop. Time froze. The landing was perfect, a textbook perfect landing. The plane came to a slow stop. Silence existed for an instant, then, like a wave at last breaking, applause surged through the cabin. Passengers wept, applauded, extended hands to grasp strangers. Flight attendants breathed with tears in their own eyes. Outside emergency, personnel ran toward the plane. Inside, no one yet had a glimpse of the face behind their salvation. As the cabin doors opened, Captain Reeves came out first, pale, rigid eyes scanning wildly as if he couldn't believe what had occurred. Nodded toward the emergency team, said something about the co-pilot requiring medical care, and moved aside, and then Ava came out of the cockpit. She didn't smile or hold up her hands in victory. She just walked with quiet strength, her back straight, her presence commanding but not demanding. For a moment, it was as if the world held its breath. A silence fell over the front seats. Travelers strained their necks. Whispers tickled down the aisle, and then one single, clear voice was heard, small, genuine, indelible. "Mom," a small girl whispered, eyes wide with wonder, grasping her mother's sleeve. "That pilot, she resembles me." The mother blinked, then smiled, tears welling up. That one, sentence so plain, so powerful, meant more than applause ever could. It was a moment that cut across generations of silence, of invisibility, of doubt, and then the silence became something else. Thunderous, irrepressible applause. People rose. Some openly wept. Others nodded in somber respect. Eva didn't bow. She didn't wave. She simply locked gazes with that little girl and nodded softly, the kind of nod that speaks volumes. You belong in any sky you choose. Undefined, and in that moment, the woman they had questioned, the woman they had disbelieved, had not only saved them from dying, but altered the way they perceived the world. By the following morning, Ava Coleman's name was on every front page, on every major news source, on social media trending, flashing on airport terminal screens, cafe screens, and living room screens throughout the nation. Headlines flashed in great headlines. Black female pilot takes command after mid-air crisis. Brings plane in safe, saves 181 lives. Use of the gun. The news enthralled millions, not only for what she accomplished, but for who she was, the woman so many had passed by without a second look. The woman who had been dismissed by a veteran captain. The woman who sat quietly when she was asked to move aside, and who stood firm when the world was crumbling. But though strong as the headlines were, it was her own words that cut deepest. Sitting in calm demeanor during a live television interview, Ava's measured tone was steady, not bitter, not boastful. Asked how it felt to be labeled a hero, she hesitated, looked directly into the camera, and declared, "I didn't do this for praise. I did this because it was the right thing to do. Each pilot, black, white, male, female, works on such moments, the only difference. I had to work so much harder just to get into the room," and in that single sentence, Ava broke through decades of silent bias, destroyed the assumptions that had dogged her every step, and spoke a truth all too often overlooked: that skill doesn't come with a color or a gender or a title, it resides in preparation, grit, and readiness. Tributes came in within hours, flowing in from everywhere. Would-be pilots, young women and girls of color, in particular, posted videos expressing gratitude for opening the door that had been shut for so long. Colleagues from the veteran ranks hailed her as exemplary under pressure. Some even confessed out loud that they would have underestimated her as well. But the greatest surprise was when Captain Reeves, the very same man who had closed the cockpit door on her face, published a formal public apology, not from a PR department, but in his own words. In it, he stated, "My failure to appreciate the abilities and preparedness of my colleague, Ava Coleman, may have cost lives. My assumptions blinded me to her greatness. I was wrong, and I will dedicate the remainder of my career to recognizing that reality." The letter became a viral sensation. Not because it was flawless, but because it was unusual, an instance of responsibility in a universe that hides far too frequently behind silence. The airline, under increasing public adoration and scrutiny both, within weeks promoted Ava, giving her the rank of senior flight captain and tasking her with being at the helm of future safety training and inclusion initiatives for crew across the fleet. But her legacy wasn't constructed solely in the skies. Ava's tale became more than air travel. It became a testament to what occurs when one overcomes rejection and performs in high-pressure situations. She didn't campaign for sympathy. She didn't insist on an apology. She let the facts speak for themselves, and in so doing, she evolved not into a figure of outrage or vendetta, but of strength, dignified silence, and unassailable competence. In classrooms, young girls today wrote essays about her. In flight schools, teachers used her landing video as an exercise in crisis management. At home, parents retold her story as evidence that occasionally the world makes mistakes, but that does not prevent you from showing up. Coleman's journey serves as a reminder, not only to pilots, but to anyone who has ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. Be prepared. Be humble. Your time will arrive.